learning and studying and discovering and pursuing all fit into the Genesis 1 kind of mandate that we were given. Get out there, subdue the earth, govern the earth, tend the earth, find out what it has to offer, and learn from it.
Well, welcome to another edition of the Restore Healthcare Project. I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang. I am here today with Paul Manwaring, and we're going to go after a couple of new themes in our Dual Realm Healthcare Core Values series. I do want to remind you that if you are enjoying this content, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, and give us a 5-star review to help us reach more people like you. So, Paul, without further ado, welcome to the podcast today. We get to go after our third core value in dual realm healthcare.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this. Although these questions are getting harder, I'm sure they are. You know, they're out there. But
you've given us great confidence. You've got it. Well, I'm excited to talk with you about this one because I love your insights and thoughts, particularly in this area. So this third core value, I'm going to read off to get us started. This is our goal in dual realm healthcare: to recognize scientific knowledge as essential to understanding the divine design and natural order, as well as to applying the divine solutions for restoration when the natural is out of order, as in disease. Scientific process is a co-laboring with God to uncover and apply natural laws to subdue and prosper a chaotic world. That's kind of long and wordy, so we're going to have fun unpacking that a bit. And I'd like to start from maybe the base claim, which is the one that the Apostle Paul made, in that God could be known through his creation. Does this mean that the study of science could be holy? Could it be as sacred as the study of theology, Paul?
I think without any shadow of a doubt, it has to be. And the truth is that their origins are, in some respects, very closely related, and that the study of science was birthed out of theology more than the other way around. So absolutely. I mean, the verse you're referring to, I think, is Romans 1:20, that, you know, his power and his nature and his attributes have been on display. And basically the statement is we are without excuse. Mankind is without excuse for, you know, ignoring God in creation. And I never bought a copy of this book, but some years ago I heard this lady, and she spoke on actually the signs of the zodiac. Fascinating. It's in the book of Job, which is even more fascinating. And basically that the 12 signs, each sign has 3 constellations, and those constellations together tell the redemptive story. And so, I mean, the trouble is now none of us, or you might be closer to places with no ambient light. I'm by Heathrow Airport. But if you go to a place with no ambient light, you can see those constellations. So, you know, you go to, you know, some of the, you know, the Inuit nations, and the stories of their expectation that there was a Messiah, a savior coming, was not because they'd read books or studied theology. It was because they'd looked at nature, they'd looked at creation, and they'd seen these, what would that be? 33 to 36 constellations, and the 12 signs of the zodiac. And that, the tragedy is that we turned it into astrology, but actually it originated as astronomy. And so if you take that, that's a pretty good place to start. That, you know, it's on display. He is on display. So I think we're in agreement. Yeah.
And I can't help it. I'm a bit of a science nerd, so I loved science from the time I was tiny, and the privilege of learning some of these more intricate building blocks of life, like organic chemistry. I was one of those weird ones who loved organic chemistry when many suffered in pain through it. I loved it. And for me, it was just brilliantly amazing to discover these complexities that were predictable. They had a flow and design that you could actually predict, you could actually understand, uh, despite the complexity. And this is, I think, what drew me to science, just the awe.
Yeah, it's the macro and the micro as well, isn't it? It's that. It's the and it's incredible how predictable it is. I mean, even if you take, I'm not an expert in probably anything scientific, really, scratch around a little bit, but the fact that you can predict the next time a meteor will pass by and almost do exact moments, and the precision, and so the study of the universe is taking us closer to a belief in God rather than away from a belief in God. And that should tell us everything. Uh, so yeah, it's utterly fascinating, both in the big picture and in the tiny picture. And the reality is that, I think I've said this on here before, but you as a surgeon can do everything, but if that skin doesn't want to join up at the end, there's not a thing you can do about it. That relies on the predictability of the created order, which is what I think you're talking about.
And it is something we have to learn, isn't it? It isn't something that we are born understanding and knowing. There's this kind of interesting treasure hunt of life to discover and to learn. I think that there are some who have a Christian worldview who perhaps don't value learning as much, um, maybe because they see the sacred as more holy than the secular and still see that divide in place. Maybe we could just live our lives just studying God. But in fact, I think you would view it differently. Like, why is education necessary, especially for a Christian?
Yeah, and isn't it? I mean, isn't it interesting that the Great Awakening birthed the universities of the East Coast? Isn't it equally amazing that the universities of my country, particularly Oxford and Cambridge, were birthed on Christian foundations and Christian principles, and it feels as though we've kind of removed them, and we need to rediscover the origin and the history. And should we study? Yeah, I mean, it's just another example for me of co-laboring with God. Proverbs says, "It's the glory of God to conceal a matter; it's the glory of kings to search it out." That is a invitation to search out what God has hidden for us. He's hidden things. I mean, I'll often say, take your smartphone in your hand and realize that smartphone was hidden in its component parts, and it was either grown in the field, bred on the land, or blown up in a science laboratory. There's virtually no other option, but it was hidden for us. And so we have to lose that. There's this kind of slightly crazy worldview, that God's an old guy who sits on a cloud and chats to Moses about Moses type stuff, and wasn't that fun when we parted the sea, and that God wouldn't know what to do with a smartphone if you put it in his hand. So if you take that as the example of, I mean, and that's the result of study and of education. So to me, these two things go hand in hand, and learning and studying and discovering and pursuing all fit into the Genesis 1 kind of mandate that we were given. Get out there, subdue the earth, govern the earth, tend the earth, find out what it has to offer, and learn from it. So absolutely. And then even, you've only got to look right the way to today, that a lot of the most recent developments in studying sort of brain science and neuroplasticity and such like, it's actually confirming things that we kind of knew, but it's causing us to understand the science and the mechanics. So yeah, we should be studying, we should be learning, we should be growing. And if we don't do that, it's kind of an example of co-laboring. So we don't study, and it's like the garden. If you leave the garden on its own, it becomes a mess. I think if we don't study and we leave creation on its own, it will become a mess.
And it's a really fun point to think about God actually hiding things for us to find. It's incredible. And I know, maybe plastics and fossil fuels have a bad rap right now in our current climate change discussion. But in fact, having found these things deep in the ground, petroleum has allowed plastics that have been life-saving in healthcare, for example. Um, there's things that we've created that are harmful. It's true, but we have created incredible breakthroughs, even just in our sphere in healthcare, from things we have found hidden in the ground, the quartz in the ground that creates the silicone chips that would be in our phones. Literally, God could use a phone because he put the stuff we need for it in the ground. He knew it. He must have known. And just as a parent, I think about the delight that I feel in seeing my kids discover and find the things that I'm hoping they'll discover and find. Is it possible that God has that kind of delight in us too, that as we study and learn and start to get excited about what he has designed for us, that he also has joy?
Yeah, I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said something like, "God is the only child in the universe, and all the rest of us have grown old," with kind of cynicism or something like that. And he paints this picture of God creating sort of the daisy, and then he looks at the daisy and goes, "Do it again," and it's that sort of that sense of the childlike nature of God in creating and in watching us discover. And I sometimes think back to the photographers of 100 years ago who were trekking into Yosemite and taking the photographs and maybe only being able to take one at a time, and almost imagine God looking down and going, in 50 years time you'll be able to take so many photographs you won't know what to do with them because digital will be discovered. And I think it's that. I think we have this wonderful creator, father, God, who wraps up those identities all together and is looking down at his creation and enjoys us discovering and pursuing. And of course, our discoveries have changed. Some of the discoveries today in medicine seem so much greater, but you've only got to go back to, penicillin or digitalis. I mean, they were hidden for us to discover. So they're all in the same line of man's growth. I guess the complexity is that um, we're not perfect. So we've stepped outside of his plan and his principles, and so we've discovered things that are harmful, even though they might have benefits to us. There's harm to them. So I guess that's kind of fallen nature of man, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point too, that there is some hesitancy I find amongst Christian circles of higher learning because there's this worry and this belief that secularism and secular worldviews have contaminated higher education, and that if we pursue that, we're going to somehow be contaminated by those worldviews. Maybe our children are going to be contaminated or influenced, and they're going to lose their sense of their purpose, identity, and worldview where God is at the center. Um, there is some reality to that there are opposing worldviews that we find in higher learning. Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we create Christian universities where we isolate ourselves? Um, or do we engage with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and there's an element in which our world feels a bit scary. You've got young children, I've got grandchildren. It's the same. It feels the same. It's like, what world are they growing up into? But maybe it hasn't changed as much as we think it's changed. Maybe the scale is greater. So, I mean, this is a shameless plug, but I've just written a book called Divine Encounters, and it's based on Paul or Saul on the road to Damascus had an encounter. That encounter obviously completely changed him. But it didn't just change him. It actually equipped him. That encounter equipped him with the answers to the world that he would write into. and that the problems of Corinth are not that different to the problems of our world today, of morality, of elevated wisdom, of the accumulation of knowledge, and even deconstruction and a number of other things. And my point is that the the bottom line is to know God, and that this depth of knowing God. I mean, there is Saul, who was a murderer, he was a terrorist, and yet one encounter completely turned him around, and we 2,000 years later are still benefiting from the wisdom and the teaching and the understanding of God and the laws of God, and we still benefit today. So I think at one level it's not necessarily new, and that's why obviously I'm gonna cheer anybody on that is pursuing revival, by which I would mean ones to millions of people coming into a relationship with Jesus. But that must lead to reformation. And that's really what you're talking about. It's like, if we don't succumb to secularism, it's because there's a reformation. That, to me, it's the only answer. So I think us believing that God would move again through us. And of course, you've got in this country the Methodist revival, which led to the incredible Reformation, which influenced prisons and healthcare and education. And so our cry, I think, must be, do it again. Should we hide? Should we all be homeschooling? Should we start in Christian schools? I don't know. I think it depends where you are. I think there are some situations where you probably should. But I also don't think we should back away from the world we've been sent into. We need to get into the world we've been sent into.
If we truly believe that our encounter with the nature of God has transformed us, we would want that to be available to more. And how would we actually see reformation occurring in society at large if we don't engage, if we withdraw? And I think about that. I have heard some criticism personally of sending my own daughter to a public university, and she's in second year of her university training in science, and she's confronting the same things I confronted, aspects of science that I'm not sure how they fit with my worldview. What do we do with evolutionary theory? What do we do with some of these secular humanistic ideas that have permeated the way science is actually performed sometimes? And how do we approach the bioethical issues that we view very differently, perhaps, than our secular culture? And I have felt so strongly that I do trust God. I do trust His work and His ability to encounter us. And I am not afraid of engaging those ideas. I'm not afraid of my daughter engaging those ideas. I want her to learn to think, to evaluate, to critically evaluate these mindsets, and to find where there may be some areas that need truth restored, and to not be afraid of that. I'm not afraid of evolutionary theory. I actually think that more and more we're seeing that science is leading us away from original Darwinian evolutionary theory, and that those aspects of science don't make me want to reject science. It makes me want to step into it and bring restoration. How would you approach that? Because I do think that there are plenty of Christians who really worry about higher education in general because of the presence of these kind of theories that challenge our worldview. Hey, Healthcare Tribe, I hope that you have been impacted by what I've brought through this podcast. I also want you to know about opportunities to give back through my nonprofit, Selah Health International. We work to support projects for women and children of vulnerable populations around the world. You can learn more and donate on our website, selahhealthinternational.org.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably be very, very similar to you. I don't think it's time for Christians to withdraw. from our world. I think it's, one of the faults that we've had in the past, I think, is that um, we have had a secular sacred divide, and because we've had a secular sacred divide, we haven't celebrated the next generation getting involved in areas of the rest of the world. We haven't valued them as highly, and so sending our children and our grandchildren into university, and as you say, teaching them to study, to think for themselves, to have the ability to make their own decisions. I think that's what we absolutely need. And then if that's partnered with, I think, a church we need some help in the church, that's for sure. But I think if those two things are partnered together, I can't see any other option. I don't think withdrawing's the option. I think it's that we truly grab hold of what I would call an apostolic assignment, and we send people into the world. And I would say we're in a position, if I look at the last 50 years, and we've studied identity more than ever before in the church, sonship, identity. We know who we are. When we didn't know who we were more afraid of sending people into a university, thinking that our children would be polluted. I believe we're now getting to the place where we're raising up people that we believe can actually influence. And we're also much more of, I would say, a destiny generation, where the sense of discovering why I'm alive and what my purpose is. And I think if we put those two things together and we raise a generation who really believe, who know who they are and believe they're on this earth for a purpose. And then I would add to that the two other pieces, which is our apostolic assignment is to bring heaven to earth, and our kingdom assignment is to expand the influence of the king in every area of life. I think if we have that first, and then into that we put the challenges of secularism, and the challenges you've talked about in university. If they come second, I think we've got it in the right order. If they come first, then I think we have.
Very good point. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on this mandate too, because I think that you refer to the mandate to prosper and subdue the earth, which comes from our account of the beginning in Genesis, but also you refer to an apostolic mandate to bring the kingdom. How are they different? How are they related? What does it actually mean?
How long have you got? I think there are two things that really overlap, and maybe they have been neglected in a lot of the church. And what we're seeing now is, I think, in the last however many years, we're seeing a revival of these two themes. We are seated in heavenly places. We're Ephesians. That's what it says. We're seated in heavenly places. I believe we're sent twice. Once from heaven to earth, and secondly, through the church, sent again to expand the influence of the king. So I don't separate them. To me, they're not separate. If we're sent from heaven to earth as apostolic believers, bringing heaven to earth, what Second Peter says, we're partakers of the divine nature, and we have access to all of the power. That's what it says. So we have all of that, but then also we're made in the image of God. And that believing that our work is ministry, our work is worship, and that we've been put on this earth to subdue the earth, and to influence the whole of mankind. So I don't separate them. I actually think that the four things about our generation is that we're an identity generation who are being raised to know who we are, that we're a destiny generation who have this strong awareness, both in and outside of the church, of there has to be a purpose for being here. And then I would say that we're a heaven on earth generation, or the supernatural, believing that we walk by faith, and that we are a kingdom generation who are to influence the whole of our world. So I put those four elements together. And of course, that's totally the healthcare professional. It's absolutely the healthcare professional that you have access to the supernatural, but you also know that you've been given, skills, wisdom, knowledge, education, learning, to, as it were, be a vehicle to carry the supernatural with you into the world. And sometimes you'll heal with a scalpel, and sometimes you'll heal by laying on hands. So to me, those four elements, the doctor who knows who they are, recognizes their purpose, is bringing heaven to earth, and then is wanting to expand that because they don't see what they do as second class. Those four things go together beautifully.
Mm. And perhaps you might even also add to that this, because you alluded to it, this mission and mandate to reveal who God is. We actually have a unique opportunity to do that as we study and we learn science. We're encountering aspects of the designer. I actually had felt that when I was in medical school and we were learning about the kidney. And to me, the organ at the micro level, this particular organ is just so fascinating. I didn't decide I wanted to do that in medicine, but the loop of Henle and the ions and the salts and how they move across. It's so simple and yet so complex. And the fact that it all works is just mind blowing. And I remember sitting there like, I can't even remember all these aspects. I'm trying to memorize every little concentration along this concentration gradient. I'm supposed to remember this. I'm supposed to understand how drugs work on it and how to fix it and how it goes wrong. And it's so complex. And I remember just feeling this overwhelming realization of the designer in his complexity at the same time as simplicity. And there's something about that, learning that and describing it, that is revealing him too. Is that part of what we're called to in learning?
I love that. There's a verse, I think it's Exodus 3:12. It says, "You'll know that it's I that sent you when you come back to this mountain and worship me or serve me," is the other way. And I have this sense that, there's these moments when we see us in God. Like when you see your gift, your skill, your career, your profession in God. And it's not worshiping you, but there's that moment, you'll know it's I. And I remember when I picked up the translation of the Bible that had a fifth definition in Isaiah, wonderful counselor, mighty God, eternal Father, Prince of Peace. And then it had extraordinary strategist. And as I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, I love strategy. I can see me in you. And I think that's what you're saying. It's like your study of the kidney in that instance. And if you'd gone on to practice your urology, I got that right? No, not urology. I got the wrong. My brain went then. If you've gone on to practice that, you can almost imagine yourself standing in front of God and seeing, oh, you created that. I can see me in you. I can see, there's a little piece of me because I understand that, that aspect of how you designed it. And I think the other thing that we get to reveal is the tension. There's every aspect of life exists in tension. You just described the kidney. I know so little, but I do know that kidney functions because there are different concentrations, different pressures on either side of membranes. And so physically, emotionally, and spiritually, we live in tension. It's almost the nature of life. And actually, a lot of the problems in our world, like secularism, are because we are refusing to live in a degree of tension. And we polarize everything and say, this is right and that's wrong, so to speak, a political spirit or a religious spirit that says, I have a better way of getting to God than you. And yet, actually, God created life to be lived in physical, emotional, spiritual tension. And we have this incredible privilege of revealing him. I remember the first time I stood in a pulpit and I said, my assignment is to reveal God. And as I said it, I thought, is that heresy? And it's like, no, I'm meant to be Christ-like. And Jesus said, I reveal the Father. And so we are meant to reveal him. You're revealing him. I've got a list of 100 attributes of people. They're just things you do. So, caring, um, you know, knowing, creating, discovering, adventuring, all of those are attributes of God, and we're revealing Him. And you do that, what you do, healthcare professionals do it. And, some are prescribing medicine and some are washing a patient. And, there's just these incredible, beautiful moments that we have the privilege of revealing Him. But often it gets lost because we treat ourselves as less valuable or less significant, and we don't feel that what we've done or what we are doing is a first class ministry. And that is a passion that will run through every podcast I ever do with you, that every healthcare professional watching this is a first class minister of the gospel of the kingdom. And that is as simple as that. And there is no first and second class calling, ministry, or anointing.
And to partner with that intentionally is so powerful. I also think of many of my colleagues that I've worked with who, some of them to their great detriment and suffering even, they're so driven to care for patients, to discover science. Even recently in our recent COVID epidemic, to see scientists just laboring day and night to try to understand this virus better, and feeling the weight of the world on them, but they're driven by something deep inside of them to pursue this and to find breakthrough. And evolutionary theory doesn't really explain why humans would do that. Evolutionary theory would seem to suggest that we would not do that. Like, altruism doesn't have an explanation in evolutionary theory. And this drive to discover and to make better, where does that come from? Even when you don't know or have encountered your mission and mandate in Christ, I see colleagues who actually are mirroring who God is as they're discovering these things, as they're driving themselves to discover them, and yet have not yet found Him. They're on their way. Isn't that also a part of what we get to do, is to discover and to demonstrate through discovery who God is to the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think this conversation is a great one, because it's expanding and increasing the kind of the canvas, if you like, on which people can have that revealed to them. And if that canvas is a church-based canvas, that's very limited. But if the canvas becomes whatever you're doing for your career is first class, is erasing the secular sacred, is marrying the natural and the supernatural, is bridging any sense of us and them, we've just painted this canvas. And back to the book I've just written, and one of my phrases is, the Bible is not a book of, like famous people first. It's a book of ordinary men and women who had an encounter with an extraordinary God, and they've now become the famous men and women. And so every one of us, if you like, our assignment is to be a world changer and a history maker. Even if our world is our family table and we don't have global influence, that's our assignment. And we get to reveal Him in millions of manifold, beautiful, stunning ways. But obviously what we're talking about here and with science and healthcare professionals, we actually, if you sort of rewind our conversation a bit and we go, if we hadn't done what we'd done, like if the world hadn't evolved, if the world hadn't developed, if education hadn't developed, if discovery hadn't developed, I wonder what this world would look like. I wonder what it would be like, and so that co-laboring, it has to have, in the history of time, like revealed Him. I don't know whether I said this before, but there's a book, I think it's the Structure of Scientific Revolutions by a guy called Kuhn. You may or may not have come across it. I don't know whether I said this before, but if you study the world through the four great paradigm shifts, every paradigm shift had it is as if it had a purpose, and that was the purpose was the gospel. We discovered the world's round and not flat, so we spread the gospel. We discovered the printing press, so we put the Bible in the hands of everybody. We discover electricity, so we can communicate. We discovered the internet, so we increase that communication even more. And it's as if each of those steps, those scientific steps, was somehow in the heart of God, and that man has aligned himself with the heart of God. And the trouble is that we've seen the perversion of all of those. But the original plan still exists. And that's where I think we just need to hold on, like the pilot flying the plane in turbulence just needs to hold course, fly by the dials and not how they feel. And let's just keep going.
I think about how each of those examples you gave, they might actually be representations of what Jesus said when he noted that we would do even greater things. And that's like mind-blowing, right? Because we think of the supernatural and the miraculous things that Jesus did and the people that he reached, but the numbers of people that he reached, perhaps, and the numbers of people that he healed, they have been surmounted by the breakthroughs of science and healthcare, and ministers of the gospel through technology. And are these the greater things? And do you think that actually God has hidden bigger scale healing for people for us to find in science?
I think absolutely. And I think you'll keep on discovering them. And it would appear that the evidence from the Bible is that we won't have learned how to heal everyone supernaturally when he comes back, because he said, "Will I find faith?" Which suggests that we're going to still need to be believing. So I think the two run a parallel. I can't see it any other way. And you look at what people are achieving with technology. There's kind of a parallel is where I love the concept. I didn't realize it for years, but science and technology are two words and not just one word. And that science discovers cause and effect and technologies harvest it for the benefit of mankind. And I love that picture. And I wonder whether theology discovers cause and effect and kingdom harvests it for the benefit of mankind. And in a way, those two kind of parallel thoughts are working hand in hand and moving us forward. And the more these elements, it's almost as though there's a spirit of science and a spirit, as it were, of theology that are meant to be closer together. And I compare it actually. I don't know whether this is right or not, but when I look at, especially the West Coast of America, there's 100 years of revival history, 100 years of Azusa Street, John Wimber, Jesus People movement, of healing movements, 100 years of history. But there's also 100 years of Hewlett Packard, Boeing, Facebook, Tesla, Twitter, the whole thing. And the revivalist without the entrepreneur will run out of resources, but the entrepreneur without the revivalist will run out of purpose. I wonder, similar to this conversation, that the goal has to be that the lines converge, that the science and technology and the theology and kingdom actually converge and work together for the benefit of both.
The lines converge. Christ brings all things into unity. And here in healthcare, we get the privilege of celebrating that. Thank you, Paul. This has been a fantastic conversation. Stirred, I'm sure, many new thoughts, challenged some old ones. The lines need to converge, and they are. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. That was fun. That wasn't quite where we'd go, but it was fun.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us here today. And again, I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang, and this has been the Restore Healthcare Project. Hey, Healthcare Tribe. I hope that you've been impacted by what I've been able to bring through this podcast. I also want you to know about some opportunities to give back through my nonprofit, Selah Health International. We work to support projects for women and children of vulnerable populations around the world. You can learn more and donate on our website, selahealthinternational.org.